It was a high-stakes moment in the courtroom, with all eyes on the intense exchange between two powerful figures. Pam Bondi, the renowned defense attorney, was presenting her argument before Judge Amy Coney Barrett. The air was thick with tension as Bondi delivered her points with the sharp precision she's known for, trying to make her case in a way that would sway the court. However, at one point, Bondi made a comment that caused an unexpected reaction. In the middle of her passionate defense, Bondi used a bit of humor to lighten the mood, making a sarcastic remark about how she believed the proceedings were veering off course. She laughed lightly, the sound echoing in the otherwise silent room. The laughter wasn't mockery but more of a nervous release. Judge Barrett, typically stoic and composed, couldn't help but let out a chuckle at the comment. It was a brief moment of levity, a fleeting interruption in an otherwise serious exchange. The laughter from both the judge and the attorney caused a ripple of surprise in the courtroom. But what happened next was something no one could have predicted. Bondi, who had been trying to maintain control over the direction of the conversation, seemed to realize in that moment that she had made a slight misstep. Her laugh, though light-hearted, was not well received by everyone. As the court settled back into silence, Bondi noticed that her casual remark had shifted the dynamic in the room. Judge Barrett, who had responded with a brief laugh, returned to her usual impassive demeanor. However, Bondi, still trying to maintain her composure, realized that her comment may have crossed the line. With the sudden change in her expression, she tried to backtrack, adjusting her tone and quickly reorienting her approach to the argument. She began speaking more seriously again, but the lightheartedness she had briefly injected into the room felt out of place, and she could sense that the weight of the courtroom had shifted back to the serious nature of the case at hand. As she did so, she tried to focus, but there was an underlying discomfort in her words now. Barrett, who had returned to her serious posture, noticed the shift in Bondi's tone, and for the first time in the entire proceeding, there was an undeniable pause and almost imperceptible hesitation that made it clear Bondi was now second-guessing her words. Bondi attempted to quickly regain control of the room, but the discomfort lingered. She knew that her laughter, while an attempt at humor, had been misinterpreted in the context of such a serious matter. And while Judge Barrett had laughed along briefly, it wasn't something that could simply be dismissed. The respect between them, built over the course of this legal battle, felt momentarily fractured. Bondi, usually quick on her feet with a well-placed comment or sharp rebuttal, found herself fumbling for the right words. She paused mid-sentence, her mind racing to find a way to refocus the conversation on the facts, on the arguments at hand. She had come to this courtroom with the intention of making a strong legal case, but now, her own human vulnerability was on display. The judge had laughed at something Bondi had said in a way that seemed to put her on the spot, and in that moment, Bondi's frustration mounted. How could she recover from this? How could she bring the conversation back on track? The weight of this situation was starting to weigh heavily on her. But it wasn't just the case that was at stake now, it was her reputation, her integrity as an attorney. Judge Barrett, meanwhile, noticed the change in Bondi's demeanor. Her eyes, once filled with the intensity of the legal arguments being presented, softened as she observed Bondi's internal struggle. The room, though quiet, was charged with an unspoken tension. Barrett, who was known for her unflinching professionalism, had seen many attorneys try to navigate difficult moments in the courtroom, but there was something different about this one. As Bondi stumbled over her words, trying to regain the confidence that had previously defined her approach, Barrett couldn't help but reflect on the emotional toll this trial was taking on everyone involved. There was a moment of understanding, a quiet realization that everyone in the room was dealing with more than just the legalities of the case. They were all, in some sense, human. Barrett could see that Bondi was vulnerable, that the laughter they had shared earlier had caught her off guard, and now she was grappling with the aftermath. The irony of it all was that this brief, light-hearted moment, which was meant to ease the tension, had instead exposed a raw emotion that no one could have anticipated. Bondi's anxiety, now palpable, was beginning to manifest in her voice. She had become aware of the judge's subtle shift in expression and the weight of the room's silence. It was as if everyone in the courtroom was holding their breath, waiting for something to break the tension. Bondi cleared her throat and attempted once more to get back to the matter at hand. But this time, there was a change. She no longer seemed fully in control of the narrative. The words she spoke were still well constructed, but they lacked the firm conviction she had shown earlier. The force with which she had argued previously now seemed a little diminished, her confidence rattled by the earlier moment of laughter. Bondi, known for her poise under pressure, found herself struggling to maintain that composure. She glanced briefly at Judge Barrett, her gaze lingering for just a moment. And then it happened that the emotional weight of the situation became undeniable. Bondi, in that brief pause, felt something she hadn't expected. The laughter that had momentarily lifted her spirits was now a source of regret. She felt her eyes water as the realization hit her. The seriousness of the case, and the stakes at hand, were too much for her to brush off with humor. It wasn't just a case, it was about lives, consequences, and the very essence of justice. Judge Barrett, watching this shift in Bondi's demeanor, understood the gravity of the moment. She had never seen the defense attorney so visibly shaken. Barrett had, of course, seen many moments of high emotional tension in courtrooms, but this one felt different. It wasn't just the legal argument being made up, it was a human moment, raw and real. Barrett could feel the weight of Bondi's vulnerability and couldn't help but feel a deep empathy. This wasn't just a defense attorney trying to salvage a case, this was a person deeply moved by the realities of the courtroom and the lives it impacted. Judge Barrett had seen attorneys come and go, but she had never seen one so deeply affected by a simple moment of shared laughter. The laughter, which had initially seemed innocent, had now become a symbol of how fragile everyone was in the face of such high stakes. And it was this realization that hit Barrett hardest. Despite the powerful role she held as a judge, she too was not immune to the emotional toll of the case. And in that moment, she saw Bondi in a new light, not as an opponent, but as a human being who, like everyone else, was trying to navigate a complex and emotional situation. Bondi, now on the verge of tears, took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. The courtroom was silent, and it felt as though the weight of the world was resting on her shoulders. She knew she had to pull herself together. She couldn't afford to break down in front of everyone. But the floodgates had been opened, and it was hard to stop the emotional surge. Her voice, once firm and authoritative, cracked as she continued to speak. She was no longer just defending her client, she was fighting to maintain her dignity, to salvage the respect she had worked so hard to earn. As Bondi spoke, she could feel her emotions threatening to overtake her. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke, and her voice wavered with each word. She had become deeply aware of how fragile she was in this moment. Despite the professional exterior she had always maintained, she was now facing a very real emotional challenge. And in that vulnerability, she realized how much she was invested in the outcome of the case, not just for her client, but for herself, and for the broader implications of justice. For a moment, Judge Barrett observed the scene, her own emotions running high. The room, usually filled with the cold precision of legal arguments, now felt heavy with empathy. Barrett, whose role as a judge was to remain impartial, found herself drawn into the emotional complexity of the situation. She had seen the way Bondi struggled, the way she had fought to keep her composure even as the tears threatened to fall. Barrett, too, had her own moments of vulnerability, moments where the weight of the law seemed too heavy to bear. But as she watched Bondi, she realized something. Despite their differences, despite the arguments and the opposing sides, they were both human. They both understood the importance of the case, the stakes involved, and the emotional toll it had taken. And in this moment of shared vulnerability, Barrett saw a side of Bondi she hadn't anticipated. It was a side that spoke not just to the legal prowess she possessed, but to the humanity that lay beneath the surface. The courtroom remained still, every eye on Bondi as she struggled to regain her composure. Barrett, sensing the shift in the air, gave her a moment to gather herself. Bondi wiped her eyes, taking a deep breath before continuing. She spoke more slowly now, her words carefully chosen, but with a softness that hadn't been there before. There was no more bravado, no more sharpness to her tone. Instead, there was a rawness, a vulnerability that showed through. She wasn't just making her case anymore, she was speaking from the heart. It was a stark contrast to the hardened, calculated defense she had initially presented. The transformation was palpable, and it was clear that the emotional weight of the case had taken its toll on her. But in this moment of emotional rawness, Bondi had also shown a side of herself that was far more human than the lawyer everyone had seen before. It was this vulnerability that made the entire courtroom pause, as if they were all witnessing something far more profound than any legal argument. Judge Barrett, who had witnessed the emotional transformation of Bondi, was now fully aware of the gravity of the situation. She had seen the defense attorney break down, but in that breakdown, Barrett saw something deeper and unspoken truth about the cost of this legal battle. The case, the arguments, the stakes, they were all important, but in this moment, it was clear that the human element was just as crucial. Barrett, moved by Bondi's vulnerability, had no choice but to acknowledge the emotional weight of what was unfolding. It wasn't just about the case anymore, it was about the people involved, their lives, and the toll it was taking on them. Barrett, ever the professional, could not ignore the power of this realization, and in that recognition, the courtroom seemed to breathe as one, a collective sigh of understanding that they were all part of something much bigger than just the legal case. The silence in the courtroom was now deafening, broken only by the soft sound of Bondi's voice as she continued. She spoke with a depth of sincerity that no one had expected. Her words no longer felt like an argument or a defense but a plea for understanding, for empathy, and for recognition of the humanity behind the case. Judge Barrett, whose emotional walls had remained so firm throughout the trial, found herself moved by Bondi's words. The shift was palpable. Bondi had gone from being an attorney with a sharp and calculated approach to someone speaking from the heart. It was a transformation that no one could have predicted, least of all Judge Barrett. As Bondi finished her statement, the room remained quiet. The emotional weight of her words hung in the air, and it was clear that the dynamics of the courtroom had shifted. Judge Barrett, who had been so composed and in control just moments before, was now visibly moved. Her face, usually unreadable, showed signs of vulnerability, tears welling in her eyes. It was a rare sight for anyone who had witnessed Barrett in the courtroom. But in this moment, it was clear that the emotional power of Bondi's words had broken through even the toughest of facades. The walls of the courtroom had been broken down, and what remained was a deep understanding of the humanity at the heart of it all. Bondi, though still visibly shaken, felt a strange sense of relief as the courtroom remained still. For the first time, it seemed like the emotional reality of the case had been acknowledged. Bondi had allowed herself to be vulnerable, to express the deep emotional toll the case had taken on her. And in doing so, she had not only made her point but had also brought everyone in the room to a place of shared humanity. Judge Barrett, moved by the depth of Bondi's words, wiped away a tear as she took a deep breath. It was clear that, despite the legal complexities of the case, the true essence of justice had been felt in that moment.